and most appreciatively welcome Rhian Kenny, who's here from the Pittsburgh Symphony. Um, Only an hour away, and we were just talking about springtime and rowing because Rhian rows and her daughter rows, and how great it is to be opening things up a little bit for those of us in the northern hemisphere. And so happy spring, everybody, again this week. And Rhian, could you share a little bit about who you studied with and just a bit about your bio and your journey, and then we can start with the students. And Dustin will be giving you like a 5-minute warning before each time ends up.
Okay, so I have a little bit of a journey to get here. I was born in Africa. I was raised in Canada, in Calgary. I went to university in Montreal at McGill. I studied probably nobody you would know when I was younger. Martha Durkin, Kathy Baker, who else? Philippa Fullerton. Trevor Y was a big one for me. I spent 3 weeks with him when I was 15 in England. But Tim Hutchins was the one who sort of grabbed me and threw me in the right direction. I had 4 great years at McGill with him. And then actually at the end of my 3rd year at McGill, because I did my degree in 3 years, Tim was saying, okay, it's time to start taking some auditions. So piccolo position in the Toronto Symphony opened up. Well, I owned a silver Gemeinhardt piccolo. So I said, I can't take an audition on this. So he said, borrow mine. So I went and I made it to the finals. But in Canada, when you take an audition, they have a little bit of a protective mechanism to try and get their own musicians' jobs in their own orchestras. And so the first round is always for Canadians only. And so they didn't hire at that round. And so silly young me, I made the mistake of thinking, well, I made the finals, I'll make the finals the next time too. It doesn't work like that, and the second round is always international. And so I did not make the finals, I did not get the gig. So when Pittsburgh opened up, my teacher, I was now in my first year of after undergrad, but I never finished whatever that was going to be. And he said, you should go to Pittsburgh. Well, I didn't know where Pittsburgh was, to be honest. And you know how it is, you get on an airplane, you still don't really know where you are unless you really make an effort to figure it out. So I came down to Pittsburgh and I auditioned and I won the job. And so the best part, honestly, about winning that job was it happened to be Mother's Day. And my Mother's Day that year was also my mother's birthday. So I called her up and said, happy birthday, happy Mother's Day, you no longer have to support me and that is your gift. So that was 1990. Anybody born in 1990? No. It's a long time. I don't feel like I'm old enough to have been here for 31 years, but that's where I am. That's how I got here. And you know, Trevor Y and Tim Hutchins were really the people who, okay, Martha Durkin really started me off, and she started me off very well. There was no time that I didn't have somebody who was very serious about my future that was guiding me. And I don't have any really strong recollections of the thing that she gave to me, but she did. But it was, you know, me starting at the ground floor, and so then climbing. It was all the little things that made a big difference. There are things that Trevor and Tim said that have stuck with me, and I use a lot in my teaching. One of the things that Trevor said was the piccolo is an extension of the flute. And I never played piccolo with the exception of one time in National Youth Orchestra of Canada. I played piccolo in Tchaik 4. And I didn't know it was hard. I didn't know it was supposed to be hard. I heard people saying things like, oh, I can't play principal flute after I've played piccolo because it ruins my embouchure. I'm like, why? So I think that Trevor's statement that piccolo is an extension of the flute was really an important part of my growing up. The only musical growing up. The only time I had any difficulty was I was playing a piece. I think it was the Lorin Maazel Concerto for Flute and Orchestra, and James Galway was playing it, and I had to switch between bass flute and piccolo. I very nearly dropped the piccolo when I went from this to this, but that's the only issue I've ever had that I can recollect. So that's how I got here. It's my story. It's my sticking to it. So do we want to play now?
Sure. Thank you so much. That's such a great story. It's been so nice to hear a little bit of everybody's story who've been our artists for this series. Okay, so we have three performers. Dustin, what is the order, would you say?
We can go with Jacob, Lydia, and Ethan.
Okay.
Ethan's is the shortest with an excerpt, but I
Okay.
also Jacob volunteered to try sharing from his computer if that worked.
Sure. Let
So
me make you or did you make him co-host already?
I think he should be able to. Jacob, do you want to go give it a shot? See if you can screen share.
So can you hear that, Rhian? Yes.
ogni tormento. Si dolce ogni tormento. Si dolce.
Hey, Jacob.
Thank you. What year is Jacob?
I'm a senior.
Oh, excellent. So this is a language I totally don't speak. All right. Um, I just this pandemic started playing around with extended techniques on the flute a little bit. I haven't even touched it on piccolo. So, what do you see yourself doing with piccolo?
Um, for me, I enjoy kind of, in general, with all extended techniques, just exploring around what the different instruments can do and the different kind of sounds and textures. I'm very sensitive to textures in music. That's kind of the thing that I focus on in a lot of it. So in terms of like piccolo, at least with this piece and what I've been trying to do with my extended technique playing is like trying to explore the different like areas that the piccolo can go and kind of reach the boxes of that.
I thought it was a really cool piece. And I think a mark of a really cool piece and a really good performance is making somebody want to do it. And I want to do it. So the question I have is, what do you think can make it better? Different.
Um,
What is there?
I think maybe, and this is something now looking back on it, since this performance was last year, the pacing of it and kind of pacing and staging of the silences, I think could definitely be improved to kind of keep that suspension and keep the audience engaged, especially since it is such a different sound than I feel like people would be used to uh, coming to something, a performance of like piccolo or flute.
I agree with you entirely. I think of music as tension and release and sound and silence, right? And the silence can have as much impact as the sounds if we, okay, if we let it breathe. Um, and if we use that silence for dramatic impact, right? Another thing that I think, one of the things that I find really challenging with modern music, well, I guess we call this modern music, contemporary music, is having a really solid basis in the instrument itself. And so last night when this came through to me, I listened to it once through. I had no idea what was in the score, what the score looked like. But what I thought I could hear was when you had the few notes that didn't have extended techniques and such in it, I felt that you weren't quite in the center of the sound, in the center of the instrument. So, like I said before, I think of the piccolo as an extension of the flute. I think that all of the exercises that I do on the flute, I do on the piccolo. And I think that contemporary music is an extension of the basics of the flute, right? And so that's the one thing that I would probably see if you could get more into the center of the sound, get more into the instrument itself. And there was one little spot with a little bit of technical difficulty, right? The fingers weren't quite lining up, I think with the tongue maybe. Those kinds of things, I think, I have said, and maybe it's elitist to say, but I think anybody can figure out how to make that kind of stuff work. It's the sound that not everybody can have access to. So, do you have your piccolo?
No, I'm
Okay.
in a school building.
Oh, yeah, and who wants to listen to that? I would say, okay, so here I have to come clean for a moment. I
5
haven't,
minutes.
5 minutes? Oh, I'm so bad with time. I have not done much piccolo practicing in the last 12, 13 months. And so right now I really don't want to play for you all. But I think if you did, I'll do a long tone or two. I think there was a B in there, right? I feel like the air was going like this a little bit instead of really getting into it. I love harmonics. I love them on the flute. I love them on the piccolo. I think it really helps us to find that center. And I think if we all, like, clearly doing a piece of repertoire like this for you is something you want to do, something you love, something you do really well. Great. Don't forget to take the moments that you need to make the little things perfect. Don't forget to do your long tones and your harmonics. And when you have those notes that don't have the extended technique, make sure, I mean, who's really going to notice? But maybe some people will. I did. And so I wish you did have it and that we could just sort of try a few things to find your way into the instrument a little bit more. And then, yes, the other thing that I would say is when you have a long note and it has a little fall on the end, the glissando, hold it out a little longer. Make us wait. But that's kind of really all I have to say without having that language in my own vocabulary, I guess, in my own language.
Rhian, I'd like to ask a question that I think would be a great question to field. So in terms of when the orchestra, Pittsburgh Symphony, has these, you know, a composer in residence or pieces that come in, and I think I played once with you guys some contemporary piece. What's it like for members of the orchestra who don't have in their own, especially certain instruments don't have a lot of repertoire for that incorporate extended techniques, and I don't even know that a lot of orchestral music has it embedded in each part, but in terms of like conceptually and the experience of playing pieces that are contemporary in sound and concept, I'm just curious, like what happens backstage after, you know, or what do people talk about? Can you share what the experience is like or what you hear it is like for other instruments?
Yeah, so we don't do very much of this kind of stuff at all because the symphony management, and maybe it's universal or somewhat universal, symphony managements are a little bit risk averse. So they don't want to take a risk and have audiences say, I'm scared of that, I'm not coming. I can't buy a ticket to that, I'm not sure I'll like it, right? But the PSO has done some work with Mason Bates. I love working with Mason Bates, and that is pretty much as risky as we've gotten. At least my memory is not good to begin with, and then the pandemic sets in and I haven't got any memory cells left. But you know, when the first time he came in with his turntable and the sounds, and we still didn't have to do very much in the way of extended techniques ourselves. Like nothing that I wasn't able to do is how I term extended techniques and extended techniques. I personally love to have a piece that has a real challenge, something that I've got to really dig into. I've played Beethoven 9, 300 times. I've played Mahler 1, 600 times. I've played Tchaik 5, because that's Honeck's, our music director's, favorite piece. Probably played that 1,000 times. And, you know, so those kinds of things, when we get a great conductor standing on the stage and brings something new to those pieces, that's incredible, and I explode my head. That's great. But I don't have to go home and say, oh, we've got Tchaik 5 again on the program. Better get that out and practice it. I can pretty much play that in my sleep. Scheherazade, I'll get that out every single time I see it on a season, because that kicks my butt. But I love to have a contemporary piece come in, and I've got to get it. We get the music about 6 weeks in advance, typically, and if I can get it 6 weeks in advance and make sure that there's nothing that's unplayable, but if it's a challenge, it invigorates me again. It's another way of saying, yeah, this is why I do this.
Yeah, and I think that's, we all, like all the freshmen start on extended techniques. Even it's not the main thing that we do here. Some people might think it is, but it's not. But I think, you know, they'll all say that the first time they see the Great Train Race or whatever piece it is, it's like horrifyingly, you know, scary. And so part of it is that sense of challenge. And I think for you and I, people who've been in music so long, it is that sort of like sense of challenge after feeling like less challenged by everything we used to be challenged by. You know?
And the other thing is, I have spent my 31 years in the Pittsburgh Symphony, plus however many years before that when I was practicing and I was a student and I was learning. And I didn't do the extended technique stuff then. Maybe it didn't exist, at least to the same extent. I don't know. And I landed in this job so young that I never had to go outside of my comfort zone. But I mean, I'm teaching students now, and some of them come to me with beatboxing, and I'm like, well, okay, you go ahead. But this year I got outside of my comfort zone because it's a pandemic. Why not? And so I did a little bit of beatboxing, not very well. I hear your students and you do it, and it's like, wow. But it's still, it's something that, it's a challenge technically, it's a challenge psychically and emotionally, and in every other way to let go of, there's the music, I just interpret it. I don't make things up, I don't tell stories. It's like, yes I do, I can do that. So I think it's, as you can imagine, there's 100 people, well, there's only 80 something right now in the symphony, but you can imagine that there's as many people as there are personalities, and you'll have people say, I don't do this, that's not what I was trained to do, and then you'll have other people going, I can do this, yeah, this is pretty cool. And then I've been inspired by some of our younger members and them just reaching out and doing this stuff, and it's so mind-blowing and so awesome, and it makes me want to be a part of that community. So I think it's really great to explore and try new things. And the very first thing I did at the beginning of the pandemic was order new music, and music that I didn't know. And so then all of it, though, was stuff that was mainstream, not mainstream rep, but because some of it was unknown or just newly discovered, some of it new written. But then I did this Facebook recital, and I played a piece that one of my grad students brought to me. It had whistle tones, it had some beatboxing, it had key slaps, tongue slaps, all sorts of stuff. And I thought, that, okay, I can do this. And it was me being brave. And now I've just found a piece for piccolo and tape. And so I'm hoping to learn that and put it on my next Facebook recital in June. So
Tag us and invite us so that we can all be there.
so that's part of the being brave part.
I think that act of courage, courage is a muscle. And whether you're applying it to tasting food that you don't feel like tasting, or trying to learn unicycling, or opening up a piece of whatever music, the point is fear will always be there, and so will courage if you pull it out of the drawer, and if you keep exercising that muscle. You've got it for memorized concerti, you've got it for huge recitals, for auditions, whatever you need your courage for, it's there, because it's courage. So
Couldn't agree more.
yeah. So okay, so let's see, we're gonna move on, and Dustin is going to
Lydia, I think we can have go next, and Lydia's playing the Vivaldi concerto.
okay, and Jacob, you're still running sound, right? Or Lydia's running it? Oh,
Lydia seems to have everything in order.
okay, great.
Okay, you guys can see it. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
So what year are you?
I'm a senior.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. So tell me what you think about this movement.
Um, I think my goal with this movement is to demonstrate a lot of contrast between, like, there's a lot of, like, talking, like, call and listen.
Conversation.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't think of words.
That's all right. Me neither.
And I'm focusing on, like, the ritornello form too. That's in this movement, in the third movement. So I guess my biggest thing is contrast with dynamics and articulation that I'm focusing on.
That's great. A lot of times people ignore articulation in particular when it comes to contrast. And I think articulation is incredibly important and can help our conversation even more than just dynamics, because dynamics are sometimes hard to achieve depending on the register that we're in, right? So I think there's a couple things that I would focus on if I were you with this movement. The first is being 100% even in your 16th notes. You heard that before? It often sounds like da 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 da, right? And that's a function of the articulation. So when it's not necessarily a function, but it comes out as a function of the articulation. So we have to work really hard to make sure that within the articulation, within the desired articulation, that we still play even 16th notes, that we don't recompose Vivaldi. I think you did a good job. You clearly have an understanding of where the main notes are. I can't even think of my words now. I would try and have less reliance on a rubato or on a real note lengthening. So if you think about this, right? Take very, very good care of any last note before a breath. Okay, Trevor Y, you'll hear me, if you ever hear me talk or teach, you'll hear me say, Trevor Y said, Trevor Y said. The most beautiful note the note before a breath and the note after the breath have to be the most beautiful notes that you play. So you don't have the option of going, right? You have to play until the end. So even though it's in diminuendo, etc. This little bit on the last page of this movement, again, you're doing exactly the right thing, or you're bringing out exactly the right notes, but I think it's a little bit soupy. So then the question is, do you want to play Baroque-ish, modern-ish, Baroque-ish, right? So if it's me, I'm putting some weight on 1 and 3, but I'm not doing a scoopy thing. It's more like keyboard playing, where you go dee da 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 dee 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 da da, or maybe even an organ where you can play the main notes with the pedal, and so you can hold it through a little bit. Let me see if there was anything else that. Do you have any questions? Any thoughts?
I don't think so. That's really helpful to think of more weight rather than the lengthening that I was doing before.
Yeah, sometimes I refer to those as drunken slurs. And we'd prefer to keep the drinking at the party and the music at the concert, right? And keep the two separate if we can. Not that I'm encouraging drinking, because I'm totally not doing that. I'm boring that way. Oh, the other thing is breathing, right? How do you approach breathing in this movement?
I've been planning out my breath, but I like in the second piccolo entrance. Yeah, I don't have my phrase markings right now because that's on a previous copy that I need to find again, but putting it like at a part that I feel like it's appropriate with the harmonic progression, but I've been shortening the last note or maybe even leaving it out, like if I'm feeling adrenaline during a performance. So I've been having a lot of trouble with it, definitely.
Okay, so here's the thing. Leaving out a note is fine, but making sure that you do exactly the same thing every single time. So I take a lot of analogies from sports, and my youngest daughter, in addition to rowing, she does archery. And there's a thing on the wall at archery, and it says, you do this, you do this, and you do this, and you make it repeatable. And that's what we need to do. We need to make things repeatable. Technique has to be repeatable. So if we want to play this thing, sorry. We have to take the same breath in exactly the same place every single time in exactly the same way, so that when nerves take over, our body doesn't go, ah! Right? Everything goes into your subconscious so that it comes out exactly the way you put it in. So that's the important part about breathing. And it has to, if you follow the thing, the note before the breath and the note after the breath are the most beautiful notes you play, even in a technical passage, so that it doesn't ever sound like, okay, so admission time.
We're about at time. Just
1 second, if that's okay. Sorry. When I did my little Facebook recital in February, somebody commented, "Oh, I can hear your breaths. I'm so glad I can hear them. It means I'm not the only one." And I'm like, "Oh no, that's not what I intended." So that was a total fail. But if I were doing that again, I would focus less on, oh, I have to do this Facebook recital and everyone's going to see it and blah, 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 blah. I haven't played for anyone in 9 months. And more on how I'm going to take care of the breath, take care of all of the notes, take care of the note endings, take care of the note before the breath, take care of the note after the breath. If you can do that kind of stuff, then that kind of stuff will just become a part of who you are, and we won't even notice the breaths. And so if you leave out a breath, leave out a note, that will be just fine.
Thank you so much for
You're
everything.
welcome.
Okay, great, thank you. Ethan is our third and final performer today.
Okay. Yay. I love to play Beethoven 9, even though I sit for a very, 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 very long time. But this makes it all worth it in the end, doesn't it? So, do you like this excerpt?
I find it difficult, but I do enjoy it.
Okay, that's what I want to hear more of from you. I want to hear that you love this thing. You can't wait to play this thing. And right now, it's a little bit careful, and I hope it's right. Okay? Can I make one? I love to hear that you've got everything up the octave, but how about at whatever? My numbers are cut off, but it's something 74. Put the B and the A up. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sorry, you cut off a little bit for me. Where was that?
My numbers are cut off, so I'm not sure how many hundreds it is, but it's something 74. So the B and the A, so everything's up. So after the trill, got that? Okay.
Yes.
Why not? So here's a couple thoughts for you. One is you're going to have more fun with it, okay? Another thing, I would love to hear your E at the maestoso in the second bar of the 3/4. It doesn't sound here through technology like it's really and truly focused, and you won't be able to get it to the dynamic level that you want it to be. You want it to come out of nowhere. So and I would not play those 30-second so staccato because they need to be a little bit heavier. So and the other thing is, right before the prestissimo, you took a breath, I think, right? What was the end result of that breath? Listening to yourself playing, what do you hear happen when you take that breath?
I don't think I had enough. I don't know. It wasn't a good spot to breathe because I ran out of air afterwards, I think.
Okay, that didn't quite get where I wanted. What happens if... What happened?
Oh, it breaks the phrase.
Yes, there's a hole. So that breath cannot take any time. You have to take it from the dot. Whatever happens, if it were me, because I love to play the piccolo in a moment like this because I love attention and I love to ride on top of the orchestra. And for me, if I can picture the orchestra as an organ, I am the very top note, right? And so I use an inordinate amount of air. And so I need to take breaths. This thing, I am so exhausted when we get to the end of this thing. I'm so glad I don't have to play all the rest of the movements of this symphony because I would be on my bed. I'm taking breaths so much in between those, on those little eighth rests, often through my nose. Dee-da, da-da, da-da, da-da. It's a practice thing. You have to practice it so that you don't lose time. Because dee-da, 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 right? Dee-da, 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 da-ga-da, 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 da-da-da-da-da. You go all the way to the end. It's, anybody, did you swim? Did you run any races as a child, a younger child? Youth?
I used to swim in high school.
Okay, so you know you don't let up when you're coming to the wall. You swim into the wall, right? You got to tag that thing, right? It's the same thing here. So you get to the end. and it's like a crescendo on those 4 A's at the end. That's another thing. I don't think you're quite getting all the way up in the high register. I think you're hoping that you're just, I'm there, it's an A, but no, get up there, get on top of the thing, okay? So why don't you play, since you have your piccolo in your hand, I see it, play from the maestoso. Before you do, play the E. Isn't the E a terrible note to start on?
5 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, the E at the
Yeah.
maestro.
Yeah. Okay, that's much better. The last 4 A's are too long. Dee da 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 dum. Think almost that you're like if you were in the Pittsburgh Symphony. We make a lot of noise in the Pittsburgh Symphony. A lot of noise in the Pittsburgh Symphony. Okay, dee da 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 dum. And especially with Honeck on the podium, he's all about drama and flair. So I would not skip that breath that you just skipped this time. Take it, but take it in character. Don't say, but we're not swimming. We're not floating. We're driving. Yeah. And in the beginning, sorry, you've got 7 beats to get from a piano to a fortissimo. Do that. But let me hear the energy of getting from a piano. So dynamics are one thing. Energy is another. Let me hear both. Let's do bum 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 ba-ga-dum. Da 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 da. This is mostly in one, right? I think that's better. It's hard to tell because the Zoom ate your piccolo at the moment.
Okay.
Do one more time, and this time continue on a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. So here, now I'm echoing. You see the fortissimo on the downbeat of the prestissimo, and you see a forte and a forte and a forte. Those are basically accents, right? So I need to hear. So it's a little bit too long. It's a little bit too heavy. Do it one more time. Okay, so the other, let's have this probably be the last thing before I get shut off here. I think your pairs of notes, the slurs, it's a little too smooth. Again, this should be an abs workout, okay? Play that one time.
All right. Would you like me to start right on the sforzando? 8.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. And this time, don't take a breath before the trill.
Okay.
Yeah, so the last thing I'm going to say is that was much, much, much better. Does it feel any different to you?
Yeah, I can feel that the energy is a lot better.
Okay. Okay. The last thing I'm going to say is when you get into this thing, it's not just a string of right? Let's feel that energy there too. So it's not. It's really important to remember 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, except in this case it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, So don't just play the notes that are there, and remember that when you see in Beethoven the forte or the fortissimo on a downbeat or somewhere, it's always to give you an indication that you need to give a little bit more something there. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Did I do it, Dustin?
You did a great job with the timing. Hey, Rhian, can I ask a pressing question?
Yep.
I just love your vibrato so much on piccolo. And by the way, I love Rhian is one of my favorite piccolo players. When you hear her in the orchestra, it's like you just didn't know piccolo could sound that way. It's unbelievable.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you for being such an inspiration. So to me, if I were to describe how your vibrato sounds to me on the piccolo, I would say that it sounds like it's completely encased. It's not flattering the sound. It doesn't, it's just this perfect round, I don't know. It just oscillates inside. It doesn't really disrupt the sound. And it's fast, but at the same time, you've got this roundness. And I know and this depth of the amplitude of the vibrato. And so with the flute, I guess my question, my hopefully easy to answer and short answer question would be, what do you feel are the differences when you pick up the flute and pick up the piccolo? Could you describe for us what the sensation, the biofeedback differences are, and even sound-wise, what you're going for or hear? Give us an inside picture into what goes on with that gorgeous sound of yours.
That's very kind. So thank you very much for saying those things. Vibrato is something that I talk about, love to talk about, hate to talk about. And you're maybe the second or the third person to make a comment about my vibrato. And again, I go back to Trevor Y, and he always said, vibrato is like eye makeup. You don't want to see a beautiful woman and say, wow, what beautiful eye makeup. You want the eye makeup to be something that enhances her beauty, and you say, wow, what a beautiful woman. So it's a sort of a double-edged sword for me. It's oh, you noticed my vibrato. I didn't really want you to notice my vibrato. But it is something that we have to talk about, because we as flute piccolo players use it, and we have to have thought about it sometime, because again, nobody came out of the womb with a beautiful vibrato, right? So the way I think about vibrato, and it isn't any different for the flute and the piccolo, because as I said before, the piccolo is just an extension of the flute. So what I think about on flute continues through to piccolo. I think of sound as 3D, and I think you grabbed it. You totally got it. I think of it as a 3D shape, an orb, and the vibrato has to fit inside that. And there are several things that make up the size of that 3D shape. Where you are in the phrase, where you are in the instrument, where you are dynamically. So for instance, a D, it's a larger shape than a C. So it can't quite have the same vibrato. Nothing drives me crazy more than maybe a colleague or two and some other people who out-vibrate the size of their shape, their sound. So I think that vibrato, there's so many things that people say about vibrato. I've heard somebody, and I forget who it was, say it's like the engine in a car. Once you start it, it's always running.
No,
I
get
don't.
that.
But I like to think of it as being part of your airstream. Your airstream is vibrating. It's living. It's what's bringing the music to life. And so that is the living organism. So if we have this living organism that is flowing from you through your instruments to bring the music to life, we have the vibrato as part of that. And it doesn't mean that it's always on or that it's not off sometimes. But I never want to hear it start. So I never want to hear, what happened? Hello, piccolo. Oh, I must have water somewhere. I don't want to hear vibrato start in the middle of a note, ever, ever. That doesn't mean it doesn't start in the middle of a note. But I don't want to know when it starts. I want it to come in so that it's so not noticeable that starts and you don't even hear it. And you can't identify where it starts. So I like to think of it a little bit ombre. Does everybody know what ombre is? You know, I see people with hair that's ombre. That's what I'm thinking of. And so it starts and then it goes just, and then there it is. And I think of that as the vibrato shape for the phrase. It starts and ends very much the same. And it's like this up to the middle and back down towards the end. Does that help?
Yeah,
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I love when that happens, when you describe a sound that you hear and the person's like, that's exactly how I think about it, you know. And I think it's such a testimony to the power of visualization. And I don't just mean from a psychological standpoint, like visualize your future, but like that how we holographically experience sound, not just from verbal descriptions, but in terms of images that we create. You know, like if you think of a peach with the fuzz and the nut in the middle and the juice and how big is the peach, and that's what you want, you know, or a gobstopper in your mouth or whatever it might be. And I just really love your piccolo sound is truly remarkable. It's just so, and even the other thing that struck me about your playing just now when you were working with Ethan was that it just sounds so powerful, and it's so easy to overpower the piccolo. So how would you describe, if it's possible, like that access to power that you have, even in terms of the explosivity of the articulation or the accents that you are able to get to come through in terms of spectrum, like 0 to 10? I mean, you truly have a 0 to 10 or 0 to 12, like a spectrum on the instrument. So how would you describe how you handle that power on an instrument that so often cracks or really can't handle power when a lot of people try to put power into it?
That's a great question. So I think back to a former timpanist in the Pittsburgh Symphony, Tim Adams. One of my daughters was having percussion lessons with him, and I started talking to him about timpani sound. And he stood up and he hit the drum, and I jumped, and he said, "That's what some people do." And then he took his strike of the drum, and it was completely different. It's like, how do you do that? And so for me, I always think, and I think you've hit on something very interesting, because I often hear other piccolo players and they've got this lovely sweet sound, and I think, I don't sound like that. How do they do that? And I think it probably comes out of my not thinking of myself as a piccolo player. I can't tell you how many times I've had flute students or flute players say, "I don't play the piccolo." What? Why not? And it's similar with the flute. If we want to get more flute sound out of a flute, we can't just blow more, because it'll go sharp, it'll be ugly, you know. So again, it's taking care of the sound and being grounded. I often will walk up to a student and give them a shove. If they fall over, they're not grounded, so they're not going to get into the sound and get the fullness, the richness. And I think it's thinking of probably harmonics. If you think of the root of the sound and it grows up like that instead of just being a sound. I also have pictures of eggs, Humpty Dumpty sitting on the wall. No, we're not sitting on, we're skewering him. So there's sound on either side of the skewer, the fullness of the sound. And the piccolo, it's true, there are very distinct limits to its dynamic range, but I always look for as big a range as I can make. And if I see piano da fortissimo in 7 beats, I'm going to give you a piano da fortissimo, and it's going to be a fortissimo that you're not going to forget.
Yeah.
But it's always, I never want it to be a harsh sound. So it's always centered, at least I hope it is. I try always to have it really in the center of the instrument, so it's never, you can sit there with a tuner and the tuner will say it's in tune, right? But if the harmonics are not, or the partials are not lined up inside the sound that you're making, it will sound sharp or flat, right? So if we can get really into the center of the sound and have the tuner say, okay, we're in tune, then it's not going to sound harsh. And thankfully, I have had that comment from my colleagues. I mean, our poor cello colleagues, they ask for shields all the time because I do put out a lot of sound. But the volume is different than the quality, because it can be really loud and really painful, or it can be really loud and not hurt so much.
I really like what you said about, and then we'll end sadly, about building up the harmonics. And I'm wondering if when a lot of people approach piccolo intuitively, because it already is in the upper partials of our orchestral sound range, if the approach is not as grounded because the sensation is so up anyway, and you're hearing higher pitches, and therefore you're not thinking about the dimension of the sound in the same way as you might be thinking about it. I'm sure cellists think of dimension in sound in a very different way than flutists feel it, or in a biofeedback way kind of sense it. But I think what you just said about really thinking about building up the sound and getting all the harmonics in the root and grounding is probably a pretty much key to why you sound so rich and amazing, and why so many of us approach the piccolo with just a sort of like thin sweetness,
I think that that's where you get the color. It's the same on the flute, and I think it's the same on the trumpet. And the trumpet, speaking of, is another instrument that can sound very loud and very harsh, right? But if you can really, really get into the center of the sound, it's not.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So I have a question. Who's playing on my piccolo?
Well, we use it as a studio piccolo.
Yeah?
Who's playing on the Brannan these days? Is anyone using it? Juan and Ethan and yeah, so it's a sign out sheet kind of situation, and it's like, raw.
Is it still?
Rhian's piccolo. You want to tell us, close with a little nightcap about like where you got the piccolo and how long you played with the Pittsburgh Symphony on that piccolo?
Okay, so I think that piccolo. So when I joined the orchestra, when I won the audition, I was playing on my teacher's instrument, and the only instrument I owned was that silver Gemeinhardt. Okay, so I win the audition Mother's Day, that's May. I start in September. I got to find a piccolo, and one that I can play in public. And I call Brannan because I was going to play a Brannan. That's what I played for the audition. And they said it's a 3-year wait list. I'm like, I can't wait. I just won an audition. And they said, sorry. So I explained to them it's the Pittsburgh Symphony, and they said, sorry.
What?
So they did.
You wouldn't do that now, because now there's the power of social media and having
Right.
like sponsors and representatives on your instrument. But that's interesting.
Tom Robertello was in the Pittsburgh Symphony, and he had contacts at Powell, so he got me a Powell. Now that Powell, this was the octave. It was so hard to play. I mean, basically impossible to play. So, but the next day, Brandon called me and they had put me on the emergency list. And so I had one by about a week or two into September. So, and that is the piccolo that you have.
No, I didn't know they had an emergency list. That's nice.
Well, it's a cancellation list, so that if you have an emergency, somebody cancels, instead of going to the next person, they take the person with the emergency. I mean,
That's awesome.
how many times are there, real emergencies? But I think that was an emergency.
So the piccolo that we have is the emergency list piccolo.
Yeah,
All right.
it's got a story.
How did you play in the Pittsburgh Symphony with it? Till you sold it to me,
Yeah.
like it. Yeah, which I think it was. What was it? 4 years ago? 3 years ago?
It was probably, it was right before we went on a tour, and I was determined I was not buying another piccolo, but Jenny brought in a piccolo because she was having trouble with hers, and she said, "Could you try this?" And I said, "I really don't want to." And she said, "Please try it." So I tried it, and I went, "Oh, now I have to have this." So I called Jim Keefe, and he said, "No, you can't have that." I'm like, "I have it."
You're like, don't you have an emergency list?
But he said, "No, that's the one I send out for trials." And I said, "But it's in my hands now. What are you going to do? I'm going on tour." And he said, I need it. It's going to somebody else on Monday." I'm like, "That's nice." And so we made an agreement that I would send it back to him, and then he would make another instrument that he would send out for trials, and he would send that one back to me. It would take some time, but he kept calling me and trying to talk me out of it. He said, "It's 440. You play on 442. I said, "That's fine." I said, "I didn't even notice the difference." And then he'd called me again and said, "So I put some holes in this piccolo by accident and I filled them." "That's fine." And so I finally got it. And so that's the one that I now play
So
on.
when you guys play on the piccolo that we have, just remember it's an extra special piccolo.
It's got some of me in it.
Yeah, and so many great conductors and so many great vibrations from the cellos and all that it's been through.
Hmm.
So thank you, Rhian, so much for your time and your wisdom and your passion and your guidance and being here with us today. And thank you, everybody, for your attention.
Thanks for having me.
Bye. See ya.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Enjoy the water.